Krishi Gandhi Knowledge Series, and we are very proud to welcome our chief guest, Dr. Ashok Dalwai sir, to give the first talk, that is My Experiments and Experiences in Agricultural Development, Message to Extension Workers. So on this occasion, I request our Director General to kindly introduce Dr. Ashok Dalwai sir.
Today, of course, a great day because we are introducing a new talk series in Manage. We are introducing Agri TED Talk. I am just telling Agri TED Talk because it can take you the message straight away to you. This is called Manage Krishi Gandhi Knowledge Series lecture. The purpose of this lecture is, you all know that our extension workers are spread across the country. There are 119,000 extension workers as per our estimation. More than this number are in the private sector. They are working in nook and corner of the country. Everybody says capacity building is one of the greatest, inadequate capacity building is one of the greatest bottleneck in effective extension. So, agri institution development and agri leadership development, these are all the two weak areas where the life experience, inspiration, motivation plays very important role. So Manage has taken this responsibility by introduction of Krishi Gandhi Knowledge Series lecture. Here, we bring the outstanding professionals in the field of agriculture development, national and international level, to this platform. And they will address our faculty as well as students. We are the direct beneficiaries of their talk. So, like organizations and individuals, they have the advantage of listening to outstanding professionals, sitting in their office without disturbing their work and getting inspired and motivation. So, this is first in the series, and we didn't get a better person than Dr. Ashok Dalwai ji. Again, it is our privilege, sir. I just, I am really privileged because as a Director General of CCS, National Institute of Agriculture Marketing, 2018, I initiated this program, and the first talk was delivered by same Dr. Ashok Dalwai ji on 2nd October, Gandhi Jayanti Day. Afterwards, the program went in uninterrupted, and every month we invited very outstanding people from different walks of the life. This program became very popular, and all the talks are there in YouTube channel. The same thing, we are also going to get these films in YouTube channel. So these films not only inspire individuals and organizations, but also they can use this as a study material while conducting the training program. With that greater purpose, we are initiating Krishi Gandhi Knowledge Series lecture. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Ashok Dalwai ji. Dr. Ashok Dalwai ji is, needs no introduction. So he is known by Dr. Ashok Dalwai report. Dr. Ashok Dalwai is a Kartru of, the architect of Dr. Ashok Dalwai committee report on doubling farmers' income. This committee, as a chairman, this committee was appointed by Honorable Prime Minister just to drive Indian agriculture towards, doubling farmers' income. So, apart from that, Dr. Ashok Dalwai ji was born in a place in a district called Belgavi in Karnataka. He is basically, for our pleasure, he is an agriculture graduate and did his master's in agriculture economics, did his doctorate in agricultural economics, and during 1984, he got selected for Indian Administrative Service to start with IPS, then shifted to Indian Administrative Service. At present, he is CEO of National Rainfed Area Authority, and he is serving there. And he is most wanted person by all the people in Delhi. So, in spite of that, he took 1 day time and came here and spent entire day with us. It is our privilege. Now, over to you, sir. For next 45 minutes, you are going to listen from Dr. Ashok Dalwai, My Experiments and Experiences in Agriculture Development, a message to the extension worker. The target is the last extension worker who lives in the village and works with the farmers. Thank you, sir. It's over to you.
Thank you. Let me first thank Dr. Chandrasekhar a dear friend and Director General of this institute. All that he has said is emanating from his kindness and his warmth. It's my privilege to be standing here under the open sky this beautiful evening, and it has been further romanticized by all the young boys and girls here. It's always the youth who give us that energy and make us also feel young. All the faculty members, all of you are my dear friends. So everyone else here, once again, thank you to all of you. And I hope you're able to hear me clearly. All right. It is my privilege that Chandrasekhar has given me once again to begin the lecture series, Gyandeep lecture series at this institute. And he had given me a similar privilege in 2018, as he said, and that was Gandhi Jayanti Day at Jaipur. And there's a connect between Gandhi Jayanti Day and International Women's Day. As you know, Mahatma Gandhi, even as he fought for the political freedom of this country and mobilized the society, he was simultaneously an agent of change. He was, in fact, giving greater importance to social transformation. And among the many evils that our society suffered then and continues to suffer to some extent was emancipation of the women. He focused on the need for changing the environment for the women of this country, for he religiously believed that women do matter for a healthy society. And he also believed in the power of education as a tool for transforming, for metamorphosis. And the connect between his Jayanti and International Women's Day comes through what he said, that you educate a man, you educate a person. You educate a woman, you educate a family. And that is the powerful connect. So I would like to thank Dr. Chandrasekhar and this institute for letting me live that beautiful and lively connect between the 2 days. And the topic that has been chosen and given to me puts me in a very embarrassing position. It is talking about my experiments and experience with agricultural development. Mahatma Gandhi wrote, "My experiments with truth." But he could write because, as he himself said, my own life is a message. So we are talking of some real great people, Mahatmas. Mahatma is, unlike you and me who have Atmas but Alpatmas, Gandhiji was somebody who had a Mahatma. That means he had evolved from an ordinary mortal to somebody who could be deified almost. So, talking about my experiments, a little oddity. I'm an ordinary mortal in that sense. But then, what I can do is to recount my own experiences with agriculture. It has been a very long journey, beginning with 1981. So it has been ancient times, when many of you may have not been born also, right? And then, as you know, in the civil service, it is akin to being a goat which feeds on any species. As they say, once again, in Kannada we have got somebody called Sarvajna, somebody who spoke about all the philosophical dimensions hundreds of years back. So they say there is nothing, I think Bhante should know, there is no topic on which Sarvajna has something to say, and there is no feed on which the goat cannot feed. Right? So likewise, civil servants jump from one species to another in their career. So hardly is there an opportunity for them to really develop that kind of an expertise. So it would be a little, as they say, oxymoron to say a civil servant and expertise. It is like that. But then I have been a little lucky. I've had fairly large number of stints dealing with agriculture directly or indirectly, or I have tried to make it agriculture centric even when it was not directly related. And the second major domain has been industry and urban development. But then looking back now, I can see that the association that I had with the industry also has been very helpful in looking at agriculture through a new prism. As they say, unconventionally or out of box. So let me begin where I should begin. It was very incidental that I joined agriculture sciences. It was not really out of choice that I joined, but then I began to love it after some time. As they say, when it is inevitable, better enjoy it. But then when I chose my post-graduation studies, it was very deliberate. Because by that time I knew that I'm going to try for civil services, and I felt as an administrator, it would really help to know something of economics. And because mostly all policies ultimately veer around economics. So the choice of agriculture economics was very deliberate. And when I started my service, even when I was in the police service for 2 years, I did have something to do with agriculture very indirectly. I can come to that provided I get time later on, as to how anybody and everybody can do something for the farmers. That would be the message that I would like to give sometimes later. The first time I went to Odisha was long back. As a student, I had gone there. But then, as a student, you really don't see much except to perceive that there is poverty. And when I went there as an officer in 1985, after my Masuri training, I was posted to one of the most backward parts of Odisha for my field training. And that district is called Koraput district, which is now become 4. That district was so large that from one end to another it was 400 kilometers. It was almost like a state, but no population, highly dispersed. Imagine with this length and breadth, we had only 29 lakh people living in that district at that point of time. And then I had to go and serve as a block development officer as a part of my training in a very remote place called Kashipur. Now, before we get into the agriculture development, since it's supposed to be a message for the extension, we can briefly survey what has happened to extension in this country. We started extension services before independence. We had what are called agriculture advisory services. And for the first time, some structured extension was started in Punjab state, then Punjab state, in 1920. We were having droughts and famines, people dying of hunger. When we got independence, rightly so, the emphasis was on agriculture. As then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru said, everything can wait but not agriculture. So in 1947, the first structured program that was rolled out was Grow More Food campaign. And from Grow More Food campaign, we went to what is called Community Development Project in 1952. That was based on the experiment of an NGO led by somebody called S.K. Day in the Etawah district of Uttar Pradesh. Impressed by what that community development was doing, And at that point of time, community development meant mostly agriculture. Even now it is so. So the government of India rolled out community development projects in 1952, followed by National Extension Service in 1953. Then we had Intensive Agriculture District Program in 1961. The next year was Intensive Agriculture Area Program. All these things were happening before Green Revolution. And as we rolled out Green Revolution between 1965 and 1967, we had very focused attention now because the initial programs were not doing much to transform India's agriculture. So we had national demonstrations, farmer service centers, Krishi Vigyan Kendras. So all these institutions that we now see, they all happened around that time. And after 1974, the next major initiative was in 1979, what was called Training and Visit System. Sometimes people called it as Touch and Manage. Speaking of its quality, but it has been one of the most focused and most intense extension system to date in our country. What started as a pilot under the World Bank assistance in Madhya Pradesh and met a lot of success, it primarily talked about more of specialization. Till 1979, our agriculture extension system was multidisciplinary. That means a village level worker who was called a Gram Sevak in some states, he dealt as a Gram Sevak, that means as a community development agent. He was the one who gave you seeds and fertilizers. He was the one also who took up the wage employment program. So he was the single window for every activity in the village. So they found that agriculture is not getting the due attention, and therefore T&V was brought in, where the village agriculture worker now was divested of all other functions, and he was told just focus on agriculture. And it was T&V because in the rain-fed areas, village agriculture worker was supposed to look after a family set of 800, and irrigated areas, he was given a task of managing 400 farmers. He was supposed to visit the progressive farmer, take up all demonstrations, and take the other farmers to that farm once in 15 days. And there is a technical backstop by the KVKs, by the state agriculture universities, who train the subject matter specialists of the agriculture department. For the seasonal work, if it is a sowing time, then the SMSs will be trained only on matters of sowing by the university professors, and they would take that message in turn to the VAWs, who then take it to the progressive farmer, and then to the farmers at large. So now T&V covered the entire country. It stopped in 1994. Then we had almost nothing after that. Because many states were not able to meet the expenditure on account of the huge manpower that extension had now spewed out. So the next paradigm shift in extension, which now stays till date, is what is called the National Agricultural Technology Project, NATP, which was launched once again as a pilot, once again in Madhya Pradesh in 1998. And here the purpose was to reorient extension from pure production to, once again, a multidisciplinary approach, where we bring all extension agencies on one single platform. We have a bottom-up approach to planning. We have decentralized system of planning and execution. And also, we look at how to connect the farmers to the markets. So under this NATP, we set up what are called ATMAs, Agriculture Technology Management Projects. So by 2007-8, the entire country has been covered. But there is a lot that misses as we see today. First, there are the officials. They did not get reoriented to understand that agriculture was not just production, but it was ultimately meant to transfer monies to the farmers through monetization. And though it was supposed to be a decentralized system, bottom-up approach, it just happened as though they were only formalizing what had been planned at the top. Somehow in our country, we pay more attention to formalities than substance. Well, the substance was supposed to be the soul, Atma, that originated with the farmers at the village level, Gram Panchayat level and block level. But in reality, it became a reverse stuff. Not that there were no successes. There have been a lot of successes also. But as things stand, Atma, consisting of contract employees, supplemented by the agriculture extension under the public extension system, is what exists. So before I start sharing my own personal experiences, suffice it to say that agriculture extension has been lopsided. One, it has been very crop-centric. Within the crops, it has been centric around 5 to 6 crops, wheat and paddy in north, cotton, sugarcane in south and western India, and to some extent pulses and some oil seeds like groundnut in Gujarat and other parts of the country. We have in a way left out animal husbandry, fisheries, horticulture. Only in the last 15 years we see some focus on horticulture, and since we launched what is called MIDH, Mission Integrated Development of Horticulture, in 2005-06, we're seeing a very robust growth in horticulture from around 10 million hectares to 26 million hectares now covered in horticulture. And for the first time, horticulture production overtook agriculture in 2014 at 264 million tons, both at 264 million tons. And today, horticulture stands at 320 million tons, and food grains stop at 297 million tons. But then contrast all this with milk. India is number one in milk production. We don't have a proper dedicated public extension system for milk. But our farmers have taken our milk production from 51 million tons in 1951 to now 197 million tons. Just imagine, with no proper public extension system, all driven by the cooperatives, all driven by the women of this country, have catapulted India to number one position. United States, for example, still is stalled at 51 million tons. They were much above us, 65 million tons. They were much above us in 1951. And we have left them so much behind. We have left New Zealand behind, which was so much above us. So what does it show? The idea of sharing all these data points with you is not to burden you with data, but to remember that you can draw interpretations from these lessons. And I shared 2 questions this evening with our professors from Tamil Nadu Veterinary University. For their benefit, I'll share them once again. You know that India has had 2 very beautiful revolutions in agriculture. One is called Green Revolution, which goes to the credit of Dr. Swaminathan. And then the other one, White Revolution, which goes to the credit of Dr. Verghese Kurian. And just to give a little bit of aside, Dr. Verghese Kurian was supposed to be an army officer. He was so keen to become an army officer. And Dr. Swaminathan in 1949 attempted UPSC and got selected for Indian Police Service. Now one would have been in olive green, one would have been in khaki, one would have possibly retired as a general, one would have retired as the Inspector General of Police. But destiny had that both of them did not join those services, sent them into agriculture, and they became fathers of 2 revolutions in our country. So that is a part of destiny. Okay? So now, the difference between green revolution and white revolution is very important. Green revolution was a reaction or a response to the food deficiency. We literally had no food to eat for everyone. We had to sign up PL 480 with the United States, and they promised us food. And because they gave us food, we had to sort of do whatever they said. That means it was a very shameful agreement, but there was no go. We had to keep our people hungerless. And the assumption there was that you grow more, there is somebody to eat. Because 80% or 90% at that point of time of what farmers grew was consumed by their own family. There was hardly any marketable surplus. So they did not bother about marketing. Norman Borlaug gave us the seeds. He came and convinced India that you need to grow these hybrid seeds, wheat and wheat particularly. And market is not a concern. Market has become a concern now because we have more supply and less demand in segments of food grains, more particularly cereals. But in case of milk, Dr. Kurian was very particular that there should be first a market and then I produce. So it was once again a destiny that he went to Anand. I will not get into all that stuff. You please read his book. I too had a dream. It is worth reading by all of you. I too had a dream. Okay? It is about his biography. How destiny sometimes plays an important role in life. So by destiny he had to become the manager of the Amul Milk Union of Khaira district at Anand. And when he had a meeting with his animal husbandry department, and they were advising that we should have new breeds, improved breeds, we should produce more because productivity in India was very low. He said, all right, we shall produce more. But first tell me, is there a market for my milk? And then he further discussed, he asked one more question. If I produce better quality of milk, is somebody willing to buy that in the market for higher prices? There was no answer. They were wondering why Varghese is asking these kind of foolish questions because nobody ever thought from the farmer's perspective. These animal husbandry department officials who were trained in animal husbandry, not meaning any one of you, okay? I mean, all of us are like that. We just thought that you produce, that's enough. But Kurian was very clear that I produce provided I'm able to find market, and therefore my farmers are able to benefit from that, and that will serve as an incentive. The message here is that you don't produce for nothing. You produce because you want to make a profit for somebody. So there is so much of difference between white revolution and green revolution. That white revolution was market-led and green revolution was supply-led. And therefore what we see today is the green revolution has come to its end. White revolution is still progressing. And we have 1.71 lakh primary dairy cooperative societies, mostly dominated by women. And of these, 32,000 are purely only women cooperatives. And it is these small women farmers who are actually the cause of reputation of India as the major milk producers. Okay, so this is the background that you should understand. And the final point you should understand is that today when Honorable Prime Minister talked in 2016 of doubling farmers' income, it was only a quantitative target. But the bigger mission and bigger vision in this particular statement is that farmers needed incomes. India was food surplus. Farmers were not able to sell. It is a paradoxical situation. We produce so much and yet our farmers are poor. If the farmers are poor, then what is the incentive for them to buy better seeds, better technology, better water management, make investments in land? Because any enterprise management will tell you that you invest provided you're going to get some money on that. Otherwise, why should you? So we are now reached, Indian farmers had reached a tether's end. And apart from that, the technology itself was facing a fatigue. That means, in order to increase 1 unit of yield, we had to put more and more hardware, more fertilizer, more water, and spoil the soil, make them toxic, extract water. Our economists will say the marginal rate of returns on investment are decreasing. Once again, it does not make any business sense. Business sense will tell you, if you're not making profit, close the unit. Right? If you're not making business, close the unit. But can our farmers who have no other option close their unit? They have to continue to cultivate, come what may, because there's no sense of profit there. It is a subsistence economy. A subsistence economy is you are trying to subsist. An enterprise economy is where you're trying to make profit. So that was the situation. It is against this background that the Honorable Prime Minister said, now let us convert this from subsistence to commercial economy, agriculture economy, and make it profit-centric, and therefore impart it in enterprise mode. So this is the background you should understand. Against this, now let me share my own small experiences with agriculture. I was talking to you about a place called Kashipur, where I was a probationer, BDO, long back. That particular place was a tribal block. Once again, it was a hilly, forested area, but all forests were mostly burned down because they had what is called a podu cultivation. Podu cultivation is slash and burn. And it was a tribal practice that you burn the forests and these hill slopes. You go and simply broadcast the seeds, normally ragi or some kind of a millet like that. And whatever you get, you harvest and eat, that's all. Now, in the olden times, where the population of tribals was smaller, and when they had free access to the forest areas, they had a cycle of 4 years. That means if I burn down the area in the year 2021, I would come back to that only in 2025. So that in the next 4 years, the area regenerated, vegetation grew up, so it added some nutrient to the soil. When I burnt it in 2025, there was some potassium being added to the soil. But with new regulations, where forests were now no-go areas, and increasing population relatively, the cycles became so short that they had to every year depend upon only that area. So now they're not getting anything. So we found that the entire Kashipur block is all now deforested, and once it no canopy cover, the rainfall ensures that the soil gets eroded, rocky barren patches will stand out. Even if you broadcast some seeds, you get hardly anything. So the people are hungry and have to depend upon some other work, and if work is there, fine. If it is not there, then they have to go to the forest areas, try and find some roots or mango kernels, soak them in the water. I mean, this was India in 1980s, where people had to depend upon the forest naturally couldn't produce to feed their stomach. So you see the transformation that has happened in the last 30, 40 years. That itself is a huge miracle for India. Now, in that block, I just want to give you one incident which will send you a good message. You know that we have Coffee Board located, headquartered at Bangalore. Kashipur is a temperate climate with heavy rainfall. So the Coffee Board, which is looking for non-traditional areas to grow coffee, came to Koraput. And they found that Kashipur is a good place. So both of you would know about your coffee. So now they came to Kashipur and they brought 200 hectares of land under coffee. And this is where the podu cultivation was going on. That means the tribals were eking out their living somehow by growing millets there. Now we had a situation where the coffee plantation stood up, and the Coffee Board, which had promised that every year I'll come and buy your coffee beans, failed to come. They came 1 year, they did not come subsequently. So it was then that I was incidentally posted there. And then one day, my officers again came and told me, sir, the entire coffee has now been put to fire. Entire coffee has been put to fire. Now, somebody like me who does not understand the realities of life at that point of time said, oh my God, in my state, coffee planter is a rich man. He wanders in beautiful cars. A coffee planter is somebody who's in need. And here, these people, foolish people, they don't know they're putting fire to coffee. So when me and my officers went and we met them as to why have you done this thing? We have spent so much of money on planting your coffee, it has matured. They told only one thing. When this coffee was not there, we at least got some ragi. They call it mandya there. Ragi is called mandya. I don't know why they call it mandya. Because ragi is very popular in Mandya district of Karnataka. I'm wondering whether it went from here to that place. But anyway, they call it mandya in that tribal language, Odia language. So they said mandya was enough for us. At least we had something to eat. And here you are given something called coffee. What do I do with that? So the lesson was that if you do not look at any intervention in an ecosystem manner, no matter what you are trying to do, no matter how kind your heart is, no matter how you are passionate to transform the lives of somebody, if you are not looked at all the requirements to make it a success, that project is not going to succeed at all. There was one good lesson that I learned with the coffee experiment in Kashipur. And likewise, I have many more things to talk about Kashipur when I come later on, because I had a destiny to go back to Kashipur in a new avatar a little later. I was working, my first posting after my training was at a place called Gunpur, which was 250 kilometers from the headquarters of Koraput. The subdivision itself was so complex. From one end of where I was placed to another end was 180 kilometers. And to reach a place which was just like which I could see across the river, I had to come into Vijayanagaram, Srikakulam, and then reach the place the other side. So bad was the infrastructure. So I want to share with you here an interesting experiment of how an extension or transfer of technology, transfer of any knowledge or transformation, trust is very important. Just as I talked to you about ecosystem management, how trust is very important when you deal with people. So, as a subdivisional officer or sub-collector, whatever you call him, I was very keen about agriculture as a part of rural development. So, as I could travel from Gunpur to my other tehsils and blocks, I saw once at a distance of 7 kilometers from Gunpur, I would normally leave early morning at 6 o'clock. The crop had been harvested. Paddy is normal crop there because it's a heavy rainfall area. Paddy had been harvested. I could see the moisture in the soil. As still fresh agriculture graduate, I was not very old still from Agriculture University. I thought, what is being wasted here? And I can see the cattle grazing everywhere. Why? How foolish these people could be that they're not using the soil, beautiful soil, they're not using the water. Then I asked the BDO and the agriculture officer, let's go there and try to motivate these people to do something better. Why don't you take second crop? Those all beautiful terminology like cropping intensity, etc. that you study in your college. I said, what is this cropping intensity? My agriculture officer took some time to understand what I'm asking him. But anyway, the short point was that once you harvest the paddy, there is a lot of moisture. Why can't you take a second crop? Then I went to that village. We had a small talk with them. And okay, because I have gone there, they were not very much arguing with me. Then I came back to my place and we had our very gentlemanly MLA. His name was Bhagirathi Gumango. elderly gentleman, very pious guy. He was a tribal, but very pious and also very religious kind of a person. I told him, why don't you and me go together to that place? We shall motivate the people to grow vegetables. And we shall also motivate them to take all steps necessary to stop the grazing of land by free grazing. He was saying, Aya, you go. Though they talk like that. Aya is a very respectable word. In Odia, I would talk, Aya, you go. Apad jantu. Okay. But anyway, I sort of motivated him. He was and he had a lot of trust in me. He said, all right, I'll come because you asked me. So went to the place, had a meeting with the people, asked them, what is the problem? Why are you not able to take second crop? They said what to do. Once the paddy is harvested, then there is a beat of drum in the village that now lands are free. Anybody can go and graze his land, graze his cattle anywhere he wants to. So that is a custom. I asked them, do you have something called a cattle pond? They have not heard of it. But the Gram Panchayat Act says that every village should have a cattle pond. It is the responsibility of the Gram Panchayat that if a cattle enters into somebody's farm unasked for, then the cattle can be caught, it can be taken to a pond, and you can levy a penalty. This is all on the rule book. So that means they had not heard of it. So see, there are so many rules that are there but not heard of in our country. There's nothing called a cattle pond. So we made now a system of cattle pond. We said now reverse beat of drum. Nobody shall leave his cattle on the open lands. All right, horticulture officer will go, give them seeds. He will teach them how to grow vegetables, and it's only 7 kilometers from the subdivision headquarters. He has a market. All right, we did all that. Then I told them one thing, that if you have any problem, you can directly come to me. Now this was the only sentence I had told them repeatedly. Fine, everything was going on okay. So normally I told you that it was very long distances. By the time I used to come back, it used to be late night. And then I was staying alone during those days. It was a very difficult time. There was no proper place to live also because the subdivisional officers' quarter had got washed away in one of the floods. So I was staying in a makeshift accommodation. During those days, normally when I came back, because there was nobody to cook also, normally now 2 minutes noodles are very popular. For me, that time 2 minutes noodle also was very popular with me. Because I could do nothing else. So I used to take that 2 minutes noodle package, open it, boil it, and have a glass of milk. My person would keep it. So I was trying to do that. It was already 12 o'clock in the midnight. I'd just come back for a long journey, whole day journey. Then I heard a knock on my door. I thought some knock is there. At this late hour, some emergency must be there. So I went and opened the door. Imagine a hungry person, tired, and at 12 o'clock midnight expecting some emergency. I opened the door and I saw one bulky person in his dhoti, in his shirt. He said, Aya. I said, I remembered his name. Now also I remember his name because these are all very interesting incidences in life. I said, Gopinath, why have you come at this late hour? Any emergency? Gopinath was his name. He was not a tribal. He was a non-tribal in the tribal village. He said, Aya, today people have left the cattle out to my farm. And my vegetable crop is all gone. I got a bit angry first. A cattle has come to your farm. Are you expecting me to come there and drive the cattle away? But then suddenly I remembered. It was I who had told them that if you have any problem, come to me directly. So I controlled my emotions and told Gopinath, okay, I'll come tomorrow. You go back, we'll see what can be done. The moral of this experiment, that was a village called Limapadar. And then last year, before this corona, the Gunpur people had called me. That was my first posting. I had gone there. And they took me to that village to see what has happened now after 30 years. Now it's a transformed village. What had started at that time has now caught on in a progressive road. But the lesson is that people are willing to believe you, provided they think that you are a trustworthy person. And to sustain that trust, you will have to respond even under very trying circumstances. Okay, so this is something that, really appealed to me, and something that I really retained it. And I would also share with you another instance. See, I'm sharing very random thoughts, but they are all messages. When they're put in a very sequential, logical manner, they would be an extension knowledge. Okay? What is that? That in that same Gunpur subdivision, there was a block called Chandrapur. That Chandrapur was 180 kilometers from my place. Whenever I used to go there, that was a place which was cut off for 6 months in a year. The collector visited only once in a year. The sub-collector may have visited 3 times. So I made it a point that it is my adopted block, that I shall visit this block every month and spend at least 3 days there. And to go to that place was not easy. First, you had to travel by a jeep. A river will come, you have to stop your jeep this side, get onto a boat, and from the other side you take another vehicle and reach the place. It was a block full of forests, 6,000 population. Imagine a block is just having 6,000 population with 6 gram panchayats. Not a single gram panchayat had a road. So when I went there and stayed for 3 days, my purpose was early morning I'll walk to gram panchayats with a lot of officers and come back. That is besides the point. The important point is because it was cut off from the mainstream, and the tribals there used to grow what is called mustard, alsi, mustard. Now they were so poor that the Marwadis of that area, of nearby blocks, would come give them a few small advance money and tell them that after the harvest it is all my crop. Now these tribals would sell their entire crop for a small amount of money because they didn't have anything else. So since I started going there, and I told my marketing inspector that this year we must ensure that this kind of a informal contract system shall not operate, and the inspector of weights and measures must see that whatever purchases happen will happen as per the weights and measures. And you can't believe that one season the prices of the mustard went up by 10 times compared to what they had been getting till that time. The short point was that marketing is very important, and that you need to connect farms with markets and break these informal relations that exist between a poor farmer who doesn't have a holding capacity and therefore is at the mercy of the merchants or the traders. So these are some lessons that are actually important today and are proving to be one today. To understand the people, why is it important to understand the people? Something non-agriculture, I will tell you. In the same place, we had something at that point of called Indira Awas Yojana, we used to give houses to the houseless people. And then there was a particular house, a particular village, tribal village. The project authority of that, he was not able to complete the 20 houses that had been given to him. He was pulled up by the collector in the district review. He said, sir, the people do not want the house. Imagine, we are giving free houses and the people say, I don't want. Then the collector told me, Ashok, can you go and see what is this funny thing he is talking about? So I told the project officer, come, let's go. We went there. When we sat with the people, what did they say? They told us, what I could understand was, our houses are all single type houses. There's a design made in Delhi. The same design is to be adopted in every place, in every state. Second, more important was, is a tribal area, forested area, panthers come, cheetahs come, tigers come. So tribal society, if you go, you'll find that normally their village is simply 2 rows of houses. There's only one single road. There are houses this side, houses opposite. every house is adjacent. There's no space between the houses. Why do they do that? They're not foolish. Come evening, they light fire at both the ends so that no animal can come in, and there's no space between the houses so that no other creature can come in. Now, our project authorities were not willing to allow this particular kind of construction. So you are not understanding the sociology, the local requirement. If a tiger is coming and eating you up, that is not important. What is important is that in Delhi, I have been told that this is the type, this is how I need to construct, and I shall do that. Okay. Things have changed now, of course. I'm just telling you how gradually we have changed. So we had to take a special permission and tell all right, we need to change the pattern. And then the customs are there. When the woman goes through the monthly cycle, in that particular society, the woman can't come into the house. She cannot enter the kitchen. The woman has to sit outside. But our Indira Awas Yojana was not allowing for that. That means our response has to respect the sociology, customs, traditions, the local requirements. So then only the success of a project will happen. I went aside away from agriculture, but that same thing holds good everywhere. So let me just move forward because we're taking a lot of time. As the collector of the district Kalahandi, which is one of the district that had a dubious distinction the world over. It has such a bad reputation for poverty, endemic poverty, that in 1992, when you had the Rio de Janeiro conference, climate change conference, the BBC representative Mark Talley, who lives in Delhi, came all the way from Delhi to my headquarters to take my interview. Not because of Ashok Dalwai, but because of Kalahandi. Okay? That means Kalahandi had come to epitomize the ecological disaster that is happening in the world and the consequent economic poverty. So he had come all the way down, and I remember talking something of trying to connect ecology and economy. But the point is, in that particular district, once again, the extension methodologies I want to share with you on agriculture. Naturally, agriculture was something that I found as a pivot for rural development, that all our transformation has to happen around agriculture. And as DG was telling, that we wrote a perspective plan for 10 years called Perspective Plan and Land and Water Use for Kalahandi district from 1992-93 onwards to 2003-04. So the issues here were, imagine, we had a very heavy rainfall, 1334 millimeter of rainfall, which is higher than most South Indian states get, higher than Western India gets. Here we get 600, 700 millimeters. We had thick forests, but yet there's no proper agriculture system. There's no productivity. What is the reason? Now, I found a very interesting write-up by the former collector of Kalahandi, a British officer who in the 18th century had written the first gazetteer, where he had mentioned about the nature of soils in Kalahandi. Because of high calcareous nature, their holding capacity is poor, and whatever rainfall comes, it comes within 2 months, as is happening today all over the country. So water becomes a constraint when the crop is at its critical stage. But more important was, there is absolutely no scientific system of production in that district. Broadcasting was the only method of raising crops. Wherever agriculture extension, our university would tell us that you must have a line seeding. When you have a line seeding, you can manage your weeds better, you can manage your fertilizers better, you can generally take up cultivation, etc. So we had given a target to our agriculture officers that every block this year we must get X extent of area under line sowing. Imagine such a primitive system. We are only trying to teach the farmers, give up your broadcasting system. That means don't just throw the seeds like this, have a line sowing. So there was a place called Khariyar, which was around 90 kilometers from my place. So I told that local assistant director that this year we shall have intercropping, tur and paddy, and we'll also we'll ensure that there's a line sowing. So now the seeds were reached, everything is reached there. And I had told our officer, that I told our DDA, that tomorrow morning I will also come to see how it is happening. Okay? So we had to be there by 6 o'clock. So we left early. By 6 a.m. sharp, me and my officers, we were there at that particular place. From Kariyar, we had to travel inside. We were there. You can't believe it. The agriculture officer and others, they were waiting with the fear on their mind. Collector is coming, and here a misfortune has happened. I went there, I looked, and there was a fear on the officer's face. I asked, what happened? He said, sir, they have already sown their field. I said, how? We know these people, they drink a lot in the night, mahua. They don't wake up till 9 o'clock in the morning. And you are telling, we are here at 6 o'clock and already the fields are sown? Now these people, imagine, because they knew that we are now going to ensure that there is going to be line sowing, and my collector himself is coming, they have woken up at 4 o'clock and they have broadcasted their entire field. I had a good laugh, we were angry. I had a real good laugh and said, see, this is a lesson for us. We should anticipate. So an extension machinery has to anticipate how his message is going to be received. Is it going to be countered? Just imagine that kind of things that, happen in transferring technology, etc. So to give you some other better responses, that how we should respond, how an extension machinery must respond. It cannot be a one-sided thing. It has to be understanding the field situation, understanding their capacities to absorb technology, understanding their capacity to purchase technology. And unless you do that, your extension becomes barren. So I'll give you 2 examples to substantiate this thing. One is, as you know, all our agriculture machinery will tell you that if you want to raise productivity, you have to have good seed replacement rate with the high-yielding varieties, and then your fertilizer management has to be good. Your NPK ratio has to be in this particular pattern, 4:2:1. All those kind of things are told. Now, I found in this Kalahandi district, the seed replacement rate was 1%. So some of you who are not from agriculture background will understand that, the minimum seed replacement rate is supposed to be 33% for self-pollinated crops. It has to be 100% for hybrids. It has to be 50% for high-yielding varieties. And here is a district with 1% seed replacement rate. That means they are not using any high-yielding varieties. But year after year, our people are saying that I'm selling so much of high-yielding variety. Where is it going? So we had to now make some arrangement. Then we found that the farmers are not in a position to buy the high-yielding variety seeds. So we had to now generate a new system, which may not have been a state government program, but at the district level itself, we had to redesign the program. So I remember a new scheme called Seed Exchange Program. What did it mean? That I will give you high-yielding varieties, you give me in exchange your locally grown seeds. So naturally, high-yielding seeds are very costly. The local seeds are very cheap. But then we created a fund and told the Department of Agriculture there, I will give a corpus fund. You give your high-yielding varieties to farmers. Let them give in exchange 1 kg of local varieties. And whatever financial loss you meet, you make that good from our corpus fund. Now, making this corpus fund is not easy because it is in violation of the rules. The collector has no power to create a corpus fund like that. Where is he going to get that money from? So now, how do you take that risk? Many times sitting outside, you may realize what government people are doing. They're not understanding the problems. Yes, they may not have understood the problems, but at least some understand the problem, but they're not able to do it because the system doesn't allow it. So I had to take a special permission because I had a very good relation with the then Chief Minister, because he had a lot of trust in me. He told the Chief Secretary that whatever Ashok is asking you, please allow him. So you need a CM also of that kind of courage and conviction, who is willing to stand by you. All right. So this particular package then started ensuring that the seed replacement slowly started going up year after year. And since I stayed for a long time, I had the good fortune of seeing the rise in the seed replacement rate in that particular district. Likewise, when it came to fertilizers, we found the per hectare consumption of fertilizer was 9.5 kgs. Just imagine today a Punjab farmer or a Krishna Godavari belt, they must be using 250 kgs, 400 kgs of NPK. And here is a farmer in Kalahandi using 9.5 kgs. That means most of the farmers are not using. When we asked the farmers or the agriculture department, they told me that they are not in a position to buy. Simple. And our urea bags come in a package of 50 kgs. You cannot break that 50 kg bag. Either you buy 50 kgs or you don't buy. Luckily for me at that point of time, the crop loan that is to be sanctioned had two components. Unlike now, it was what is A component and B component. That means 75% was given as cash, 75% was given as kind, 25% as cash. Since we were giving kind for 75%, fertilizers, etc., so I told the primary society, agriculture co-op society, now you make smaller bags of 5 kgs. Okay, so this must have been, in a way, history, that we broke the urea bag of 50 kgs into 5 kg bags and told them he can afford to buy only 5 kgs, sell them 5 kgs. At least he now gets to understand the impact of using a fertilizer and see a better yield. The purpose of giving you these examples is that our extension has to be backed up by appropriate delivery system. Our delivery is something, our knowledge transfer is something, the two do not match. So the knowledge has to be backed up with appropriate delivery of goods also. So many times it may not be possible, but these are some of the lessons I just wanted to share with you. So let me move forward and tell you, a lot of things can be told, but I just want to go forward quickly, that later on I had an opportunity of working in the Hirakud command area, okay, that is a very rich belt in northern Odisha. That is one of the food baskets of Odisha. Now, the problem there was, people are growing paddy, but there is nobody to purchase. They go to the APMC, they are being cheated, they do not get proper rate. And procurement is there, but not very good. So how do we strengthen procurement? So I found that if we have a proper system of procurement of paddy, then the farmers will stand to benefit. The millers will come under control. You have proper weights and measures, ensure that the fair average quality is tested, and then they get a proper rate according to the minimum support price that is notified by the government. And we found that within 2 years, the procurement improved, the farmers started getting better price, and that resulted in what is called higher productivity. And since I also was incidentally the chairman of the Command Area Development Authority, we also had money to see how the drainage system can be improved and other land development things can happen. So what does it show? That you have to understand what the specific requirements of the farmers are, then only you can make. And I would also cite you an example, how there is no coordination and convergence, which is so necessary for development, whether agriculture or anything. Our Prime Minister keeps talking about convergence, coordination, use your resources more efficiently. Imagine in 2016-14 we're talking about it. That means we have not achieved that even now. So one of the first meetings that I had as a collector, it's a huge conference hall, all officers are sitting there, it is a crowd rather. So I just asked them to introduce themselves. And I asked one officer on my right, do you know who is sitting by your side? This man. Do you know that person who is sitting there? Do you know his name? Imagine these people have been meeting every month in the collectors conference, the review meeting. They might also have met several times. But I found not more than 5% of the officers sitting in that room knew one another. They don't know. For example, the executive engineer minor irrigation does not know who is a deputy director agriculture. Or the executive engineer electricity does not know another officer. If this is the way that we work, then how extension transfer will happen? So my response to them was, now let us start getting to know one another first. Okay? So now onwards, we shall all move together to the field, understand what each is doing. When we made it a practice, you can't believe it. The poor fishery development officer who is just looked down upon, I was telling in the morning, they don't know that somebody called a fishery development officer also is there in many districts. The executive engineer, irrigation, he said, sir, I did not know that there was so much of work happening in the fishery department. That he's giving fingerlings, he's raising spawns, he's, giving on lease some water bodies to the fish farmers. Now, because he does not know, he does not respect him. Second, where an efficiency could have been brought about, it was not being effected. Now, what was the efficiency? We told the executive engineer in minor irrigation, your water is being let out through the main distributory. Now, along with that, even your small fish is flowing out, and it does not, we don't know where it is going. Can you simply have that, we'll do better stocking of your water body through the Fish Development Authority, and you have simply a wire mesh at the outlets where the fish gets trapped and does not move out. And therefore, the people who take that water body and lease are going to get better harvest, and therefore they will benefit better. Now, the engineer found this a good idea. But they got that idea only because both had started talking to each other. And both of them knew that we can do some innovation to the traditional practices. So the knowing people is so important in trying to deliver services. So likewise, our animal husbandry department, I remember, he would tell me, sir, on the IRDP, we keep on purchasing the same buffalo. The complaint was that the same buffalo is shown by having been bought by 2-3 people. All right, can we have ourselves a calf rearing center in our own district, so that we know the quality of the heifer that is being raised? And then the persons who are going to purchase will come and see that it was raised at this farm, and this is a good breed, and therefore he is now more confident of buying and getting a better milk. So the point is that you have to build transparency. Then the extension will succeed. The technology gets transferred. Otherwise, it cannot really happen. So these are some of the lessons that I want to share with you. And of course, these are all the field level experiences. But then the way the management practices must also be promoted is very critical. I was the Deputy Commissioner of Collector Raichur in Karnataka. Is irrigated by Tungabhadra. 140 kilometers of main canal starts at Hospet and ends up beyond Raichur near Mantralay. In namesake, it is 140 kilometers. It goes through black cotton soils. The canal gets broken every year. And the farmers at the upper end, they use so much of water that the last 50-60 kilometer farmers do not get any water. But they are all levied fee, water rate, as though it is being irrigated. Now we wanted to give them a new practice. What is that new practice? First, because you are irrigating year after year in the black cotton soil, your soils have got totally barren. They have become acidic, alkaline. And that proof I saw where one village was sinking into the soil. 365 houses in that particular village. The farm, one day the villagers came to me, told, sir, our houses are sinking into the soil. I said, what is this? Then they had our own story. Somebody said somebody may have done some mantra there. our houses are sinking. So I told, there was an incident in agriculture college there. I told the soil science professor, let's go and see what has happened. We went and saw. The reason was simple. The farmers are irrigating year after year, Kharif, Rabi. What will happen to the soil? It had become so bad, it had lost its structure, and it had become so much of water holding within itself. And these houses were literally sinking, imagine. So we said, all right, can we now have an alternate system of irrigation? First, the soil is getting bad. Second, the tail enders are not getting water. So can we introduce what is called a block system of irrigation? Now, block system meant, in simple language, in Kharif season, I'll give to the right side farmers. Nobody will get it on the left side. In the next season, I'll give to the left side. So alternately, you are getting, and everybody will get till tail end. Now, I will tell you this example as a case of failure. Not that I succeeded with it. Okay. So what to do now? Wes had lots of meetings with the farmers, with the academics, with the scientists, with the practitioners, NGOs, people's representative. But there was one I will not name that gentleman, a very powerful MLA who was at the head race. Obviously, he was not bothered about what's happening to the tail end farmers. He was happy as long as his constituency people got water, whether good quantity, useless amount of high quantity, he's not bothered. He wants to just give water because people want it. So he ensured, by writing to the chief minister, that this system is not good and this DC is unnecessarily interfering into the irrigation system that has been here for years together. So naturally, it could not go forward. So what does this mean? That unless you have people's representatives on your side, or you are able to convince them, and they and you are on the same note, you will not be able to transfer new management practices. So there will be failures, not just successes all the time. And you have to be prepared for that. And it's not that you give up there, but you want to experiment elsewhere, you try in some other way. So there are several things. Let me come finally to all that we are doing now. Based on all these experiences and experiments, and based on one more thing that I understand, is that ecology and economy are two faces of the same coin. Apparently, there's always a contradiction. If there is a disaster, ecological disaster today, it's because man has been indiscreet with ecology, whether it is soil or water or climate parameters. We have been indiscreet, and therefore what we see today, 24 million hectares of land in this country have become useless in all the command areas. We have yield plateauing in many parts of the country. And we have a situation where we produce more of something and less of something. While we take pride that India is producing 1.3 billion tons of food of different types, meat and milk and fish and horticulture and medicinal plants and food grains and oilseeds, simultaneously, we have a situation where we spend rupees 70,000 crore every year on importing oil seeds. Just think, we have a situation of glut in sugar, we have a situation of glut in paddy and wheat, and we have a deficiency in oil seeds, and we spend 70,000 crore in importing edible oil from Malaysia, from Canada, from Australia. So the money, 70,000 crore that would have gone into our farmers' pocket is going into the pocket of the farmers in other countries. We are not against that country, but we are first concerned about our farmers. So what does it mean? That we are not planned properly. That means we are not looking at what our country needs. We are food surplus, but nutrition deficient. India is suffering from one of the highest degree of malnourishment. The latest National Family Health Survey shows that we are almost at the bottom. There's stunted growth, there's wasted growth in the children, there is kwashiorkor disease which is related to malnourishment, anemia is there. What does it mean? That people are not getting proteins, people are not getting minerals, they're getting carbohydrates. So what is this? That means our extension system, extension is ultimately the manifestation of entire technology. When I talk of extension, not to put the blame on extension officers, it is a technology, management, planning, etc. All right? And simultaneously, we have income poverty, where farmers getting not more than 8,000 rupees per month, whereas we need minimum 20,000 rupees for a family to live with dignity, to meet all their expenditures. So if we have this kind of contradictions, it is only because we have not learned how to marry ecology and economy properly. So in this context, let me give one or two examples and then close. I promised you that I'll come back to Kashipur, that I went there in a new avatar a little later. So there was a project called LIFAD project, Integrated that integrated, what is it called? No, sorry, International Fund for Agriculture Development. It had a project called Ecological Rejuvenation of that Kashipur block and Economic Rehabilitation of the people. So these experts came and studied and said that we need to bring the entire walled patches of hills under green cover and then let the people benefit from that. It was in 1988, it was a rupees 52 lakh project meant for a population of 56,000. That means if you gave 1 lakh to each, you'd be happy. At that point of time, their income was hardly anything. Before I went, already a project director had been posted. I succeeded him. Now, when this particular block had been identified by IFAD, one of the reasons was that there was a very good NGO there. So that said that the NGO will be responsible for HRD, project would be responsible for technology, and infrastructure will be built by the engineers. And there's a project director who's supposed to coordinate all these people. So when I went there, and one of the recommendations was that we should plant what are called as vetiver. If you have heard something about vetiver, grass is supposed to be having deep roots and it is put across the slopes so that the water and soil is conserved. And along with that, the important recommendation was we'll plant agave. Agave is a fiber crop. And when agave is planted, first it is a very hardy crop. Second, because it has got sharp edges, it is not easily eaten by the cattle. And third one is that you can convert that into fiber. And all the bald patches which are already barren, no soil, can be easily brought under agave and vetiver. So the year I joined, and I went on a visit from my headquarters to that Kashipur, I learned that the previous day, all the agave that had been planted in the previous year has been uprooted by the people. Just as coffee had been uprooted, now all the agave has been uprooted. When the coffee had been burned, it was in 1985. And here in 1988, when I went back, now this time the people have uprooted agave. I said, what is the problem? The problem was the NGO who was supposed to be in charge of HRD, he had told these people that this agave is not good for you. In Odia, it was called as Murga Badi. Murga Badi means thorny bush. Okay? They said that your cattle's eye will go away because this plant, when it grows up, it will pierce. This was the advice the NGO had given. And the NGO was headed by somebody whom I knew very closely. I had a lot of respect for him also and was my close friend also. So I went and met him and told him, what have you done? I'll not take his name. Then I realized, they said, yes, what we have done is wrong. But we have done it because the project authorities have not taken us into confidence. Here, it was the ego between this IAS officer, who was the project director, and here another NGO, who also thought that he's a big man. Imagine two people with two big egos had caused a terrible loss to the project. Money was wasted, and the tribal society was now having a mistrust in the project. So it only showed us that we need to work together. Whether I'm an officer or I'm an NGO, we need to shed our egos and work together. Only then a particular project can succeed. So this ecology, to marry the ecology and the economy, if the IFAD had recommended that you grow timber species, tamarind, cashew, all kinds of perennial trees, we are dealing with a society which does not have 1 kg of extra grain at home. And you are asking them to wait for 5 years, 6 years to grow fruits and timber. Yes, you'll become very rich after 5 years, provided you survive. What happens today? I need some ragi to eat. And this was the recommendation of IFAD. And this is what our project was implementing. And therefore it was failing. So we had to evolve a new technology. And we called it as SALT, Sloping Agriculture Land Technology. That means, according to the USDA system of classification, where land is classified from class 1 to class 8, which says class 1, the most fertile lands. Class 2, not so fertile. But up to class 3, you can grow agronomic crops. In class 4, you can grow agronomic crops with treatment. But anything above that, you cannot grow it as you put under the plantation. So now we developed a new design. What kind of crop should come at what class? And simultaneously, since they had no right and title to that land, how we can survey that land and give the property right to the tribals. Imagine 1988, there was no survey of the land. The tribals who had been owning this as a community right for centuries or millennia in modern India, they did not have the ownership rights. So we had to say that if we want to create interest for the tribals or any farmer, he should own the land. That's very important. So first is to take up a survey, create ownership, and then have a technology-oriented, watershed-based approach to development. And then it is possible that he will take interest and start sustaining. So I will stop here. There are many instances that I can keep quoting right up to this particular stage. You can read and now know that based on these experiences, that economy and ecology had to be always reconciled. And very incidentally, let me close up by saying that there is sometimes something happening in this nature is mysterious. How things gel, I don't know. Your DG was telling that we wrote a DFI report which has 14 volumes. We didn't intend to do 14 volumes. We did not know initially what is it. Even we did not understand the meaning of doubling farmers' income. It took 4 months for us to understand what was it by discussing with experts and all that. And for the first time when I made the structure, I remember having written 9 volumes. But 9 volumes by the time we finished became 14 volumes. But that mysterious connect is that because your DG told me that I should speak about my experiences, I remember that I had written a book on the perspective plan. So I searched my library to see where that book is, and I could trace it. It was a thick volume once again. And then when I saw just before coming here now, how many chapters are there? Let me look at it. It so turned out that there are 14 chapters. Starting from introduction to the abstract, final package that were worked over 10 years, there are 14 chapters. And more interestingly, I found one particular sentence in that. I patted my own back, felt a little, elated. The reason was I saw one particular sentence there, under the chapter of agroecology-based cultivation, that we should promote agroecological cultivation, and the cropping system must not only be synchronous with agroecology, but the farmer should be promoted to opt for the most profitable crop feasible within that agroecology if his income is to increase. Now, farmer's income is become a flavor of the season now. Nobody talked about farmer's income. Dr. Swaminathan in his National Farmers Commission to some extent had talked about it. But 1991-92, when I saw my own report, our own report, let me not call it my report, our report, I saw this sentence and I said, farmer's income we wrote in 1992. So, it is some kind of a connect, a destiny, that what we were talking about income at that point of time this destiny gave me an option to write about income now at this particular stage. But apart from this humor, the short point is that things have not changed much. That over the last 70 years, things have changed, but not changed at the fundamental level. At the fundamental level, our ecology is at stake. At the fundamental level, our consumers still are not properly healthy. There is a hidden hunger. At that time, we had a hunger, but today we have a hidden hunger. Hidden hunger as encompassed by nutrition deficiency. We had poverty at that point of time, and today also we have low incomes for the farmers. So, at the fundamental level, as far as agriculture is concerned, farmers are concerned, the change has happened, very happy change has happened, but the change is not a satisfactory change. So we need to continue to work for the farmers. We need to continue to work for the agriculture sector. And why we need to continue to work for the farmers is don't expect that we'll be able to transfer the surplus manpower from agriculture sector to non-agriculture. Even today, 48% of the people of 130 crore population depends on agriculture. 48% means 60 crores. 60 crores means 2 times the population of America and n times the population of Australia. And if this particular population is not going to get enough income, we cannot have the welfare of the society. And just as America has done, or Western society has done, Europe has done, can you transfer these people from agriculture to non-agriculture? Will that happen in 21st century? It will not happen. It won't happen. There is a very famous developmental development model, of Arthur Lewis. Arthur Lewis in 1950s wrote a very famous model, development model, and he said that surplus manpower from agriculture will keep getting shifted to industry, manufacturing sectors, and it will be absorbed there. Now, can it happen in India? We have so many people there. Second, the new technology, particularly emerging technology, is becoming labor substituting. Artificial intelligence, big data analytics, all these things are not going to allow us to substitute the people from one sector to another. We will have to look for a situation where, if not 48%, at least 20% or 30% of our population will have to depend upon agriculture for employment. So how do we find new ways of creating jobs? So new extension has to be reoriented to tell the farmers, to enable the farmers to generate gainful employment and gainful employment-oriented incomes. So we'll have to restructure our entire agriculture, re-mandate that. The mandate of agriculture is generally believed right from the school days as producing food for the people, fodder for the animals, and to some extent some fiber. Food, fodder, and fiber. These are 3 very catchy phrases. But if we focus only on these 3, we cannot generate employment. We therefore need to reorient, restructure, re-mandate agriculture to say it shall produce raw feed for the industry sector. It shall produce raw materials for the manufacturing sector. So we shall have composites. We will not build our buildings with stones and concrete. We can have composites, and composites will have biomaterials in that. We shall have biofuels. We need not use sugarcane to crush only for sugar. We already have a glut of sugar in our country. We can use the same sugarcane juice to produce ethanol. We don't have to import petroleum products. So we'll have to find new bio-prefixed materials, biofuels, bioenzymes. All our enzymes for our laboratories and industries, we're all depending upon the chemical-based enzymes. We can have biomaterial-based enzymes. So we'll have new markets and therefore new demand. So new opportunities for the farmers to sell. So that final point is, let the researchers work on new breeds of animals, new species of plants, new species of horticulture. Let our engineers research for bioprocessing. Let our basic scientists look at biotechnology. so that we shall transfer all these new methods to agriculture, and our extension works for market-led, nutrition-led agriculture, not just carbohydrate-led agriculture. So there is so much to do, and there is no end, and no answer is a finality. As Mark Talley said, there's no full stop. There's no full stop in any domain, neither in politics nor in economics. So the things will be dynamic. What you find as a cataclysmic change today will be a conservative adoption tomorrow. We'll need another radical transformation at that time. So we must continue to be with the people, understand the people's requirements, prognostically look what might happen in the future, and then reorient our research, development, business management, and extension all together to meet the challenge. So thank you very much. I've been very random. There has not been structured thought on this thing. I just thought that I will share some of the messages and for you to build on those things. So thank you. Namaskar to everybody.
Thank you very much for sharing wonderful experiences, sir. Lot of learning goes into it. When you said agroecological connect, a thought came to my mind, sir. When we announced this minimum support price policy, can we extend it to the crops grown suitable for that agroecological situation? And the second point is, can we extend minimum support price to the farmers, those who grow 5% or 10% of their land into forest products or perennial trees? So this is my question, sir.
Minimum support price is now notified for 25 crops. It has got cereals, pulses, oil seeds, fiber crops like cotton, jute, and then also sugarcane, which is an annual crop. Now, MSP is one thing. MSP based procurement is another thing. I think many a time when the farmers ask or when we debate, we are talking about the problems of procurement. The objective of MSP, minimum support price, is to serve two purposes. One is to serve as a price signal. Since MSP is notified before the season, we announced 16 MSPs for Kharif crops. Then we announced the balance for Rabi crops. We want that to serve as a price signal so that the farmers know that this might be the price and whether I should grow or not grow, depending upon his decision. That is his decision. Second one is MSP is also an assurance to the farmers that if markets are not able to discover the prices at par with MSP, then I will come and purchase for you. Okay, these are the two things. Unfortunately, what has happened? Since 1965, when you brought out this scheme, the focus has been mostly on procuring paddy and wheat. Because we knew that we had good seeds and we needed to support those farmers to meet the food requirement of the country. In result, other crops suffered, pulses, oil seeds, millets like jawar, ragi, bajra, etc. To some extent over the last 6 years, the government has corrected by adopting one more scheme called PM Asha. Paddy and wheat are procured by Food Corporation of India, either directly or under a decentralized system, where states procure but money is paid by Government of India. Under PM Asha, pulses, oil seeds and millets can be procured. So over the last 4 years particularly, the extent of procurement of pulses has increased tremendously. Like we procured 18% of the production of pulses, which is a very good incentive. Oil seeds also rose up to 8% of the total production. So far as millets are concerned, the state governments have been told, you procure, we pay for you, but you take the responsibility of disposing it. Which means that they have to find ways of utilizing the millets, either through midday meal scheme or ICDS and all that stuff. But what the issue that is propped up from this is, since under the National Food Security Act, paddy and wheat are given at a highly subsidized rate to the state governments, the states are using that through the PDS. If they now need to substitute that paddy or wheat by jawar, for example, or a bajra, then that concessional rate they have to bear themselves. That's where the problem is coming up. So ultimately, I think what we need to do is to educate the farmers in Punjab, Haryana, and Western Uttar Pradesh to reduce the area under paddy, take up alternate crops like oil seeds or maize, so that the total quantum of production comes down, and we can use the same amount of money that is now being used on paddy and wheat for under PDS to promote millets, to promote pulses. So it will call for restructuring. But as you know, these things are not easy, because you'll be hurting somebody will feel he's being hurt, and another farmer may not like it. So always, what the solutions are known on paper. It is more an academic exercise. I can make it and tell you, but how to make it acceptable to the people? It is a very difficult sociological, political situation. But it is understood that we have to do that. From the nutrition perspective also, we should now promote millets, because millets have a higher fiber content. Their glycemic index is low. So it is good for many health-related issues. But more important than all this is that we need to strengthen our marketing forces. MSP-based procurement is not the answer. Suppose we tend to buy everything at MSP, then what do we do with that? It will amount to nationalization of agricultural trade. We have to make our markets more efficient. Therefore, along with the APMC system, the Government of India has adopted the new 3 laws. One of them is direct trade platform, which is an alternate channel to the APMCs, so that we don't have a monopoly of one system. When you have 2 shops, there will be competition, right? Like, you know, we had only BSNL in 1998, and we paid for the calls we received. Because we reformed and liberalized the telecom sector, today I have so many service providers, each is competing to give you a free service or a concessional service. So in market competition is very important. So in agriculture market also we need competition. However, agriculture market is not the same as industrial market, because here we're dealing with farmers who are poor. We need to strengthen farmers also. And the biggest weakness is they don't have money to withhold. So government has said, I will give you more of institutional credit. For example, the crop loan amount has been increased to 15 lakh crore this year, so that farmers can take more loans from the people. And unlike that Chandrapur example I gave you, where the farmers depended on the Marwadi for their advance and were forced to sell their produce to the Marwadi, that situation should not happen. So there is slow and steady transformation. We will have to accelerate the pace of change. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening to all. I think I started studying extension and from 1995 onwards. Before that, in BVSC and all, we had some courses on extension. I got some interest on extension. From that time onwards, till date, I have not had such a beautiful and excellent lecture with regard to extension experience.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is because I was read many books and all with regard to agriculture section, everything. You know, nearly many books were written during our PG studies, PhD, even now. But your field experience as an agriculture technograde, one aspect, and chief bureaucrat, one aspect, and connecting the rural people to sociological aspect, perspective, nobody is having, sir.
Thank
Because
you.
my humble request is, please you share your experience in the form of a textbook, so that it is an eye opener for the future generations. This is
Well, now requires the DG to do that.
my request.
Yes,
Because
I will do it. Thank you.
Because all along we have studied our experience with the other people before 1950s, our own national election service, community development, all written by our foreign authors, mostly from our foreigners.
Yes,
But
correct.
your experience is our own country, sir. That experience, you please put it in the paper and in a book form, so that it is available to all our extension specialists as well as other related disciplines. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. We will do. Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words. Yes. Get all definitions, as you said, including Dr. Advi Reddy's famous book on extension, right, which we all read. It was mostly focused on production, whether by foreign authors or here also. We're normally talking of transferring technology with a view to increasing productivity. That means we thought we produce, that's all, supply side. So in our report we said extension or agriculture extension is an empowerment of the farmers across all the subsectors of agriculture and each subsector along the value chain with a view to increasing his income. Because we have taken that income is a representative of higher productivity, better resource use efficiency, better marketing. And finally, we have suggested green revolution just is a focus on production. What we need is an income revolution or a farmer's income revolution. That income will manifest how efficient we are in productivity, how efficient we are in resource use efficiency, how efficient we are in marketing the agriculture produce. So it is now not green revolution. We wish we start looking at farmers' income revolution. So empowerment. Today we're talking about empowering the women. Today on this International Women's Day, we're talking about empowering the women to power agriculture. So empowering is very important. We need to empower our farmers. So then the meaning becomes highly expanded. Certainly we need to relook at everything, out of box thinking, unconventional thinking. It has to be not farm to folk, but folk to farm approach. Thank you.
During my childhood, when I was studying 7th standard, 8th standard, my father was a progressive farmer at that time. And one student, PG student in Agri, MSc Agri, from Madurai Agriculture College, he visited our block office for extension survey. And that block office referred my father as a progressive farmer, go and interview with him. And I was at home that time, and my father was there, and they were discussing. And the student was asking, that time Japanese technology is more popular in agriculture to implement in India. And my father was telling why, he was asking why you are not adopting Japanese technology here, why it is not becoming popular in India, what is the difficulty like that. So my father was telling, so I have a vast extent of land and I have power tiller also. That time itself we had everything. And to handle the power tiller or implements in the agriculture field, I only have to do. I know that how to use it. And there is no person, I can't use it always. And it will be left idle. Once in a year or twice in a year, we have to use the implement.
Yeah.
And the other times it will be idle only. And every farmer can own these kind of implements. So these kind of implements should be there with the BDO office or block development office. And they should send people for handling the implements in Japan to get the how to handle technology, the drivers and all, tractor drivers or something like that. And the BDO office should supply the implements on higher basis.
Understood. Yeah. Good. See, what you're saying is right. That since our farms, you want to ask anything further?
That's what my father was telling. Everybody can't
Afford it.
and it will be idle only.
Understood.
So many farmers, so many implements, leaving idle and getting rusted is a waste, and maintenance of those equipments is also difficult.
Correct. You're right. See,
Thank you.
you're right. See, there's that problem continue. 86% of our holdings are small and marginal. Small means 2 hectares or 5 acres and less. Marginal means 1 hectare or 2.5 acres or less. So 65% of our farmers are marginal. Another 20% are small. So if you buy any machinery, let's say tractor, the horsepower is so high, it is much more than required for a 2 hectares or 1 hectare land. So any capital investment we make, we have to make provided it is able to be utilized. So what is government doing, or what are we promoting? Custom hiring centers. There is no need for everybody to buy everything. Let there be a custom hiring center run either by government, NGOs, or even youngsters as entrepreneurs. They are giving on hire. And now in our report, DFI report also written, how do we make it Uberized system? Uberized, as you know, the taxi hailing system. So if we own tractors, it is not necessary even for the custom hiring center also to buy all the equipments. He knows, I have one tractor, your DG has one, all of us have one tractor. So our numbers are with him. If somebody wants a tractor, he will call us and tell, okay, go there. So that Uberization system has to come into agricultural machineries also. Third aspect is to extend that service beyond goods. Today I give only a tractor, or I provide, let's say, pesticide. But can we now make that as a farming as a service system, what is called FAST, farming as a service? What is that? Today, as you know, even labor is not so easily available when it is required. So not only do I give a tractor, but I take the responsibility of tilling the land. So in pest management today we are saying, not necessary that you only give pesticide. Can you take the responsibility for pest management? So, for example, I sign up an agreement with 200 farmers. I tell I have young agriculture graduates or diploma holders. I leave them there who are continuously supervising the farm. And as you know, every pest has got what is called a threshold level. Till it reaches that threshold level, it is not dangerous. If it breaks the threshold level, it is dangerous. So as soon as that economic threshold level is being broken, the company itself takes responsibility for spraying. What happens now? Today I spray, but he does not spray, all my insects go there. But if all of us spray together, then it becomes a better control. And that company who doesn't have to use simple backpack machinery, sprayer, he will use a drone. So scales of economy will come in. Alright, hence there are many new ways of doing it today. The digital technology is a boon to make possible more efficient use of machinery and other services and go beyond delivery of goods into delivering of services. So I think you have to think that way, how even in case of small holdings, the scales of operations at input management level and output management level become efficient to scales of economy. So I think that's what can be done. Thank you.
On behalf of Tanvas, I feel very happy that Women's Day is being celebrated over here and our chief guest, excellent lecture. We enjoyed a lot, an extension aspect, many points were discussed. And